was waiting for you to say you were ready. So I'd like to call this the regular town council meeting, March 1st, 2022 to order. It's 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The town of Rocky Mountain House wishes to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is Treaty 6 and a traditional Treaty 6 territory and a traditional meeting ground and home for many Indigenous peoples, including the Blackfoot, Cree, Saulteaux, Stoney, and Métis. And with that being said, I just wanted to acknowledge that the healing round dance on Saturday night was beautiful, and it was well attended by lots of people from our community. I thought it was just fantastic that we supported that event. 3.1 to adopt the agenda for March 1st, 2022. Is there any additions?
I do have one addition to the agenda under, it'll be in closed session, make it item 15.4 under personnel.
Is there any other additions or changes to the agenda? So I'd like to make a motion to adopt the agenda for March 1st, 2022 as modified. All in favor? And that's carried. Thank you very much. So no delegations. Adoption of the previous minutes. 5.1, I'd like to adopt is there any questions or changes or comments to? No? So I'd like to make a motion to adopt the regular council meeting minutes of February 15th, 2022. All in favor? And that's carried. Delegation business, old business. We have an RFD. Audited financial statements for year end December 31st, 2020. Mr. Krebs.
Yeah. Thank you, Your Worship. I'll have Ms. Quinlan present this. So.
Afternoon, Council. This is kind of some housekeeping from the ICC committee. These audited statements, they're from the Regional Waste Management. Rocky Mountain Regional Solid Waste Authority, and they've been approved at the ICC level. They went in December, and it was actually Mayor Bache that passed the motion to accept them. And they do ask that each of the councils accept these as information or approve these statements. I'm not going to go through them, but these will be used as the basis. They're the last audited statements that will be done for the regional authority because it was basically dissolved, and then it kind of ran interim till the end of December where we had some sort of interim agreements. But these will be used as the basis for our dissolution. Probably the biggest or one of the most important numbers that we had a lot of discussion on was the landfill closure and post-closure costs, and they were adjusted based on a little different basis of accounting, and the auditors presented it and everybody agreed with it at the ICC. So basically these statements are ready for approval.
I thought we were waiting for 2021.
Well, they won't be doing a 2021 statement, or else they're doing I don't know if they're doing a December 31st statement.
What were we waiting for that they said it would be ready that Friday and then that Friday and then that Friday?
So, Your Worship, so these are the final financial statements for the Waste Authority because that's when it concluded its operations in the end of 2020. It's just taken a year to wrap up the finances for that. So this is the final one for the Waste Authority.
Councillor Phillips.
And so this is what the part of the asset distribution will be based on the numbers from here.
Right. So from this, we've created the net asset distribution agreement, and it lists all the assets, and where possible, they appraise them otherwise. And that's what's coming out of this will be dealing with that.
And that'll include the accumulated surplus they had of 7.2 million.
Yeah, all the assets will be distributed off of this.
Is there any other questions or comments on these statements? Do you have any questions? Like you're comfortable with all these numbers of how they've done it?
Yeah, we've been through them quite a few months ago. We had a meeting with myself and Murray Hagan and the CAO from Caroline, and we went through them with the auditors, and yeah, they're fine. I think they're good.
Okay, so I'd like to make a motion that the council approves the audited financial statements for the Rocky Mountain Regional Solid Waste Authority for the year ended December 31st, 2020. All in favor? And that's carried. Eight point one of new business, we have an RFD for the presentation and update on the 2021 assessment for the town of Rocky Mountain House.
Yeah, thank you, your worship. So I'll introduce to council Mr. Bob Dodlin. He's our town assessor and works for Accurate Assessment Group. So he's going to provide a presentation to council on the assessment for 2021. And administration is going to ask, there's two parts to this presentation. There's a public portion and then plus a closed session portion. So after Mr. Dodlin's done the public portion, I think I would like to ask council to go into closed session under section 24 of FOIP, which is advice from the officials, and then we can come back out and resume the meeting.
Sounds fantastic. Welcome. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much, your worship. Thank you, council members and staff for having us on board. At this point, am I good to proceed? Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
This is the moment everyone's been waiting for, I'm sure. I've got a PowerPoint presentation that we'll see if we can. It's animated, so it will give a little bit of life to some less than interesting information that, but perfect. At any point, feel free. Thank you very much. Feel free to ask any questions.
Thank you very much, Tracy.
There may be instances where questions are going to be answered in later slides, so then I will just defer the question to a later slide. Again, I thank you very much, everybody in the room, for awarding us the assessment services, and we enjoyed our time here during the last year, learned a lot about the community. I was familiar with the community in the past from the perspective of growing up in the nearby area, being Bowden Sundry area. So I played a lot of ball here, but it was nice to work in the community. Which button? Do I click the left button?
Yeah, I think so.
No response.
Super.
Here you go. Maybe it's too far.
You can do the wheel.
Okay. Super, thank you. So there are two parts to this presentation. And it'll start with Accurate Assessment Group and who we are, essentially kind of an education process for everybody. So you see our background, as well as the second half of it will be the highlights of the municipality itself.
Would you like me to?
We'll see what I can do here. If I fall down a lot, then I will pass this over. So Accurate Assessment Group was founded in 1997, and we have actually three offices, one main office and two sub offices in Alberta. The main office is out of Sherwood Park. Our sub offices are out of Whitecourt and Warburg. The Warburg area is where we're from, our particular team. Of course, in the map there, you can see the clients.
I'm just sharing the presentation for.
Okay, sure, yeah.
And I believe that is done, so you can carry on.
Okay. We do 20 municipalities throughout, rural municipalities throughout Alberta. We do 6 cities, 6 towns, and all 8 Métis settlements. Of course, you can see where Rocky Mountain House lies or falls within the realm that we do. We're as far north as high level and as far south as doing some specific assessment services for the MD of Tabor. You can see Clearwater. We're involved with Clearwater in the capacity of industrial assessment. We do help them out and provide a service on the industrial assessment side. Our motto or mantra, you could say, is to be your trusted advisor in every case of working with the municipality. We believe that we can be that through our team depth, our communication, and our data integrity. We have over 400 years of combined assessment experience within our team. The communication that we actually endeavor or continue to strive for are communication pieces such as what we're doing right now, speaking with ratepayers as well. Always keeping that door of communication open with property owners, administration, and council to hopefully resolve and have a smooth transition year after year. Data integrity is another facet of being a trusted advisor. And in our case, we have backups of our data. Our data is the assessment data. When I say our data, the town's data is stored at our main office, and there are backups and redundant backups regarding that. So we have all the instances in place to have secure data management. Now, as stated at the beginning, my name is Bob Dodlin. I've been with Accurate Assessment Group for 20 some years. We'll just leave it at that. It's getting closer to 30 every year. Then I also have 2 specific individuals that are going to be, have been and going to be highly connected to the town, Jesse Nelson and Corey Allen. They are residential assessors. And of course, the majority of the town is made up of residential assessment. So they will be the boots on the ground, so to speak, when it comes to residential assessment. Jesse Nelson is normally with me, or one of them is normally with me during these presentations. However, we just had our deadline as of yesterday, so I've given them a breather. So I'm here solo, and they are a well-deserved breather. But yes, they are the gentlemen that are typically answering the phones and answering the questions when it comes to residential assessment. Jesse Nelson will strive over or leap over to non-residential assessment from time to time to help back me up, because that is my specialty and focus when it comes to assessment. We also have Ray Fortin and Sean Barrett. You can see highlighted there. They are on our industrial team. When I speak of industrial, I'm talking about not so much industrial warehouse, but it's more an industrial type of property, whether it be a mill, a coal mine, oil and gas facilities. That's their expertise. Now they have expertise in other situations, such as, distilleries, breweries, those types of situations, poultry plants. So they're multifaceted in that capacity. It's a different type of assessment. It's partially regulated, highly regulated when it comes to assessment. So then, of course, we have got more. There's a missing individual who's brand new to Accurate Assessment Group. Not brand new, but he's not on the list. He was with us years ago and he's back with us now. We're named Kurt Hartman. And anyways, we have got a strong team to draw from. We've got, of course, there is another Sean Cousins on here, the very last name. He is our farmland specialist. He is one of the few individuals in Alberta that actually write and update the farmland assessment manuals for assessment in Alberta. And he has done work throughout. He has been and will be reviewing any farmland parcels that exist. Property assessment overview is the process of assigning a dollar value to a property for taxation purposes. Simply put, assessed value multiplied by mill rate equals property tax. Assessment legislation. The MGA is what governs assessment in Alberta. And within the MGA, there are regulations that are associated with that particular Section 9 of the Municipal Government Act that further regulate and I guess set parameters as to how property is assessed. MRAT, matters relating to assessment and taxation, deals with deadlines. That's a strong component of that, as well as other instances. So that is the part of, or the regulation that dictates a valuation date being July 1st of an assessment year. It also dictates that the assessment must be a reflection of the condition of the property as of December 31st. So all the parameters to how we assess a property, essentially. COPTR, Community Organization Property Tax Exemption Regulation, deals with property that may qualify for exemption due to being a nonprofit in status. And then MRAC, Matters Relating to Assessment and Complaints Regulation, deals with the situations of complaints and appeals as stated within that title. It sets out the guidelines and the parameters and what is required within the components of complaints and that. If you could excuse me 1 second. I'm just going to grab my water. Thank you. Assessment valuation. There are 4 classes of assessment. There's residential, which is assessed at a market value standard. So essentially, all residential assessment is based on market value, or should be. Non-residential assessment as well. A non-residential assessment, the defining factors there are office, retail, warehousing, or non-residential zoned land. So anything that's your traditional commercial, highway commercial, or industrial park type of a property will be assessed as non-residential and will be assessed at market value. Now, the 2 following ones, farmland, as I just spoke of a few slides ago, is a regulated assessment. So it's assessed not based on market value, but based on a set of rates that was a standardized set of rates set by the province. It's based on productivity. It has no reflection of market value. So I'll give you an example of how this instance really plays a factor in assessment. If you're familiar with Calgary, Alberta, and if you're familiar with the airport and the north side of the airport, there are parcels of land over there. If you stayed overnight or spend any time there, you see that at certain times of the summer and fall, they have round bales on. Well, this is all by design. Now, yes, it is productive land. Of course, we know that, but it is also a case where if it's 5 or 10 acre parcel, if a parcel is being farmed, it is assessed at a regulated rate, not at market value. The parcel might be worth $10 million or $50 million in that area, but it will likely, if it's a 10 acre parcel, may only be assessed at a few $1,000s. Okay, and that is just, it's just the way the regulations and the MGA is set up. It wasn't designed for that particular instance. It was designed for rural Alberta, but when a parcel is being farmed, it's a parcel is being farmed. So that's an example of where farmland, the way farmland is assessed can really affect the assessment of a property in someone's eye. Designated industrial property. This includes your linear type property, any railway, some oil and gas for the most part. It's assessed also at a regulated rate, not market value. So again, it's based on, there's costs, and then there is an added depreciation to that. No reflection of market value. So market value. Of course, the majority of the properties in the town here are assessed at market value because they're residential or non-residential in nature. This means the amount that a property might expect to realize if sold in the open market by a willing seller to a willing buyer. Now, there are other conditions in there that need to be met as well. There cannot be any undue influences, etc. But that's the short version of market value. The approaches to value, in order to achieve market value, there are 3 approaches: cost approach, direct sales comparison approach, and the income approach. The 2 that are used primarily in the town of Rocky Mountain House, as well as other towns and cities and rural cases, are the direct sales approach and the income approach. Direct sales approach deals with properties. It's focused more on a residential nature. So it states that if it's based on the principle of substitution. If you're looking at a property, the value of that property should be worth no more than a property equal to that next door. Meaning that if a property is sold for $300,000 and there's a property right next door to it that is equal in all aspects, it should be worth $300,000. That's the principle behind direct sales comparison approach. The income approach to value is focused more on non-residential property. That's your retail, your office. So the principle behind that is it is achieving market value based on an income stream that real estate should be able to provide. Essentially, most people that purchase a property that's non-residential in nature, if they're not actually running the business out of it, they purchased it to lease it out. So they're looking at what the real estate can achieve from an income perspective, and then relating that to its market value. So in the case of Rocky Mountain House, we found that most of the non-residential assessment was being assessed on the cost approach, appeared to be assessed on the cost approach that was probably slightly modified. Now, the proper and most correct way to assess these types of properties is actually using the income approach. Now, a word I want to say though, it is not based on the income production of the business in the building. It's based on what the property itself is achieving. If I own a warehouse and I rent it out, it doesn't matter to me whether they're making drilling bits in that or they're doing auto body or what. I'm going to rent it out for 12 bucks a square foot, 13 bucks a square foot, whatever that case is. That's the value that we're looking at, that income stream that the property is making in relation to market value, not what's being produced in there. Now, the same thing can be applied to an apartment building. Pretty much everyone knows the reason a person buys an apartment building, 18-suiter or whatever, it's to get a return on investment. That's the only reason. That's the same principle there too. There's an income stream. You capitalize that income stream out into a present day value. So that explains that. Any questions on that? Like I say, if there is at any time. Yes.
What's the cost approach based on?
The cost approach is based on the cost to build a property, whether it's a house, and then adding or subtracting any depreciation that exists, typically subtracting any depreciation that may exist, any form, whether it be age or location or whatever the case is, and then adding the land value. Back in the 70s, the 1960s and 1970s, assessment was very much that way. In the 80s as well, prior to me being an assessment. It was based on the cost approach and it would be updated every 7 years, every 5 years. But then in 1994, there was a move in assessment across Alberta, moving to the market value approach, which coincided with many other provinces at that point and jurisdictions across North America. So, yes, so does that explain?
Yeah.
Okay,
Absolutely.
excellent.
Because we switched, like you're saying, that a lot of commercial property in Rocky was based on the cost approach and now it's been switched over. I just wanted to clarify what that was.
Understood, Your Worship. Thank you.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Do you want me to repeat that? So because you said commercial property, a lot of commercial property in the town of Rocky Mountain House was based on the cost approach versus the income approach, which is now what you've gone with. I just wanted to clarify, how was that cost approach done? So thank you very much for answering that question.
You're welcome, Your Worship. I must say that it was based on probably a modified, what I call a modified cost approach. It was a cost approach, appears to be a cost approach, and then factored up to achieve what was thought to be possibly market value at that point. But that's no disrespect to any prior assessors or anything. It's just that we moved the assessment of non-residential assessment from that approach to a full income approach. So. Thank you. Mass appraisal. This is, well, it means the process of preparing assessments for a group of properties using standard methods and common data and allowing for statistical testing. Common data may include location, lot size, age and condition, other. So when we're assessing residential property, we use the mass appraisal approach to do that. We don't site specifically appraise every property like you would hire an appraiser, your local appraiser to come in. We do it based on a mass approach where we look at the common data like the area of the building, the area of the land, the age of the land, etc. And then we conclude, we build and conclude on a model that then of the properties that have sold, and then we apply that conclusion to properties that have not sold in a given time frame. So it's mass appraisal. It's valuing all properties, looking at the properties that have sold, and then applying the same parameters that it takes to achieve that value to the unsold properties as well. So then there's fairness and equity in the assessment to all properties. Now, in doing that, this is the only true way of being able to do 2,500 properties every year. I mean, to do it site specifically would be an enormous task and an enormous amount of money to do that. The mass appraisal approach is the method that assessors use across Alberta to appraise properties in a mass scale like this.
Is that sort of like what realtors would say, like a comparison? You take a sales comparison to properties, like when they talk
That's
about
correct.
comparables?
That's correct. It's using the common data such as, you know, those instances, whether it be the building size, the building location, the lot size, and the age of the property. It's basically stating that, okay, if you've got several properties that have sold that are all of this type of nature, then these ones, which are identical or very similar, should be worth the same as those ones. It's a mass approach.
So can I ask a question? So if you have a neighborhood that's got mixed residential, you're taking, when you're doing the mass appraisal, you're saying, okay, lot size as a whole in Rocky, you know, a lot size on River Road compared, you know, is much bigger, but there's 50 houses with that lot size. And the house next to me is just a little 2-story up down that's got a lot, half the size. And you're saying there's 20 houses like that in Rocky. You're not actually going by the individual size of the house.
We adjust. What we do is we come up with the value per square foot of the house or of the land, and then we apply that so to each property based on the model. So if we conclude that residential properties, bungalows with basements, are selling for $220 a square foot, let's say, well, a 1,300 square foot property house on a land versus a 1,400, the 1,300 square foot property will be assessed less than the 1,400 square foot, all else being equal. Now, we do acknowledge that if that 1,300 square foot house is upgraded, maybe has the granite and has all of this 9-foot walls, then we account for that over and above. But I'm just talking about how we develop a model on the sold properties, and we will take those sold properties and actually break them out. They're not grouped all together because you'll have your 1970s homes, then you'll have your 1980s homes when they move to 2x6 construction. We separate that out and we analyze those. You'll have houses that are less than 1,000 square feet, maybe between 800 and 1,000, you know, 1,000 to 1,200, etc. And we do all of that analysis, and then we apply the conclusions to similar properties, meaning similar in size and age, etc. So does that?
Yeah, thank you.
Try to. It's a complicated deal, but it's hopefully I've got that across. So
Councillor Ald had a question.
Just a quick one. And that mass appraisal, that is strictly Rocky Mountain House appraisal. It doesn't include Red Deer, Bowden. It is strictly Rocky Mountain House.
Good question. Interesting you say Bowden because I grew up there, but no, it does not. with residential assessment, it does not include outside of the realm of the municipality. And nor will it include, when we look at locations of properties, you don't include a location that may be 30% higher with a location that's lesser when it comes to value of properties. You don't blend that. We don't blend that. We actually separate that out. So you look at it as neighborhoods. But to the point of your question, do we look at sales outside of the town? No, we don't. Everything is within the town boundaries. In a non-residential setting, we may look at sales, but it's not so much, it's mass appraisal, but there's fewer of those properties, and the properties are so unique in some instances between, there's less common ground between properties when it comes to warehousing and such. So if we only have 6 or 8 sales of non-residential warehouses, maybe 6 in a year, well, that's not a large sample to draw from. So if we have a property owner that says, well, at my 15,000 square foot building, I don't think it's assessed that. Can you show me some comparables? Well, we may look into Clearwater County and look at some sales there just to see, if there's, any relevance to that would support our values. But that's a different property set. So. The assessment process, every property is reassessed annually. Okay, and what I want to say here is this is not to be confused with actually inspected annually. There's a difference. We reassess them, meaning that we do what's called a general assessment. So we reevaluate the market every year and then adjust the assessments accordingly. Typically, a property doesn't change year over year too often. We do a reinspection cycle though, and I'll speak of that in a bit. Property inspections can include development permits, progressive properties, which is also known as incomplete properties that are maybe being built but not quite complete, and then global re-inspections. So a global re-inspection is a term that we use whereby we break down a municipality into geographic regions. The best practices of assessment with the province suggest that the best practice is to revisit or inspect a property once every 5 years. Okay, that's no less or no fewer than that. Once every 5 minimum. I believe we have a cycle in place that's once every 4 for Rocky Mountain House. Now, in this particular year, we actually went above and beyond our contractual duty in this case, and we re-inspected every property in town because we're new to Rocky Mountain House. First off, we wanted to make sure that we have a solid base, a solid understanding of every property in town, and as well to make sure that there is fairness and equity. And if it were to take us 4 years to re-inspect every property, we felt that, well, there could be a staggered fairness and equity application here. So let's just visually re-inspect every property in town and know what we have and make any corrections that we come across and move forward. So this is what's happened. I'll speak more of the actual schedule here in the near future. Assessment inquiry. This particular slide just kind of stipulates the routine or the schedule of how we visualize an inquiry to occur. We hope that the property owner would contact the municipality or attend an open house, which we've already got scheduled in the near future once mail out occurs. And then they can also, phone us directly. We leave business cards with the municipality to be able to contact us in the case of they have a specific question on their assessment, or in some cases, it's a speculation question. I'm planning on building a garage. How is this going to affect my taxes or my assessment specifically? So that's what we hope that happens. Then we see we also ask that the property owners provide any and all requested information that we may request during a given year, whether it be in person or via mail, to ensure that the data that we have on file is correct and also to maintain their right to complaint of assessment. So with non-residential assessment, we do send out what we call a request for information annually. We send that out in July. And then again, a reminder letter for those that haven't responded on October 1st. So what we do with non-residential assessment or property owners is if the property is owner occupied or we establish it's owner occupied, they won't receive this. The RFI is designed to query and capture the lease rates, the vacancy rates, and the expenses associated with a rental property, whether it be apartment or whether it be non-residential retail, etc. So that is something that we also do. Then, of course, moving down to the third slide, if after all the information is gathered and reviewed and the ratepayer tends to be still unsatisfied with the assessment, then a formal assessment complaint can be filed and proceed on to a CARB or a LARB situation. Okay, that's the first half of the assessment presentation. Now moving into the meat and potatoes of the 2021 assessment. We've got 5 different property types, if you will, or broken out. The total assessment is broken out into 5 different property types, 4 of which are taxable in nature, 1 being exempt. So we've got a table here, year over year change in assessment. The residential assessment, after everything that we've done, which includes a complete reinspection, visual reinspection, as well as a complete review of the market and adjustments that were required. We've got the assessment going from 640 million to 683 million, a gain of 43 million, or approximately 7% increase in assessment. This first year, it's very difficult for us to segregate out new growth versus market change, because some of what's called new growth really isn't new growth. It was potentially missed assessment. If the building was older than 2021 and just wasn't assessed, possibly, that may have happened in a few instances, then that would be classed as new growth, but it really truly isn't new growth. It's just growth that was missed in the past. So what I can say that a rough figure would be a 5% increase in market value year over year, and probably about a 2% increase due to new growth. That's your residential assessment. But those are just rough estimations. It's very difficult to ascertain that this year. Next year will be a different story because we'll have a solid benchmark or base to work with. Non-residential assessment. You can see this is probably the most alarming change. Approximately a $40 million increase, or 18% increase in assessment. This is due to mixed changes and some fairness and equity review. That's what I can say there. There were some properties that were reviewed and found to be underassessed. There were even properties that were reviewed and found to be overassessed. So it's a mixed change, which I believe has now produced a very much more fair and equitable assessment in that department. Linear assessment, or designated, and which was part of designated industrial property, a slight increase there. Of course, we're speaking of a fairly small number in the big picture, being $11 million assessment base in that property type, but a 2% increase. Farmland, very insignificant when it comes to the total picture here, but you can see that has the largest change in assessment, a drop of 34%, or $23,000 in assessment. Probably a question that going through everybody's mind is that why did that drop so much? Because that's a large percentage drop. And this is due to us re-inspecting, of course, the fringe area properties and finding that some of them actually didn't qualify as farmland. they were not being farmed, either recently or in some cases, to our knowledge, for many years, but they were still being assessed as farmland. So we implemented the fact that there should be assessed at market value according to the Municipal Government Act, and this is the change. So, and then exempt property, approximately a 9% increase year over year. Of course, it has no taxable implication here, but approximately a $17 million increase. So overall, a 10% increase to the assessment base, or rounded a $100 million increase.
I have a question. So when you assess the farmland, you took it out of there and then put it into a different, like one of the like residential, non-residential, linear, like into a different category?
Excellent question. Yes, it would have been put into residential if the property was zoned R1 or what you are, something like that. If it was zoned commercial in any facet, then it would have been put into the non-residential at market value.
So it's not that it depreciated, it's just that it got transferred into
That's
a
right.
different area. And so could some of the increases be that 6%? You know, like your
Absolutely.
$23 million less, right? That could have gone into make your
That's
a different
correct.
area higher, right?
That's correct. Yeah. For example, one of these farmland parcels may have been assessed at, let's say, $3,000 in farmland assessment. So that would have counted for a $3,000 drop in the farmland assessment class. However, being moved over to residential class, it may be now assessed at $400,000. So that would have increased that particular class by $400,000. So
Just a quick question on that.
Yep.
So next year, the owner of that package that's been reassessed and rezoned, he throws up a couple of hay bales next year and it'll go back down to farmland.
that is correct. That is an excellent question. And that is, you know, a smart property owner may do that. That's right. And there is nothing to say that to stop them from doing that unless there is a bylaw in place that, you know, by the town, which I would think not. But yes, you're absolutely right. If there's a parcel in town that's currently, and actually that has already been told to me by a property owner of a large parcel in the east side of town, they said that they would for the future try to get some, you know, something grazing in there or something like that. And I said, okay, if you do that, then it would be classed as farm. That's correct. There are some fine, I guess, intricacies to it. If that same parcel is adjacent to municipal water and sewer, then a 3-acre site is assessed at market value and the balance at farmland. But those are one-off situations that happen. Again, this is stuff items that we look at when we're deriving what type of assessment, where it's full market value or whether it's just a site on it, all rules and regulations that are within the Municipal Government Act. But overall picture, you're correct. So the next slide is a graphic of essentially the previous slide, except it's broken down into a 5-year history. So here you can see residential. You've got a 5-year history of what the assessment has done, as well as non-residential, et cetera. So it takes that and kind of gives you I guess a previous trend and then where we are now. And here is a 5-year history of the total assessment. Just another visual or graphic. Now, this particular slide or the next 2 slides will be of particular interest to yourselves. This is the breakout of change, basically segregated into different stratas of change, whether it be no change, 1 to 10%, 10 to 25%, increases, decreases, et cetera. So as you can see, we're looking at a percent change here. approximately, I guess there's three of those rows that I would be most interested in or want to I guess highlight. Approximately 22% of the properties are actually seeing a decrease in the town of 1 to 10%. And then 32% are seeing an increase of 1 to 10%, and then approximately 17% are seeing an increase of 10 to 25%. So approximately half of the town, half of the parcels in town will be seeing an increase anywhere from 1 to 25% in their assessment.
And what do you credit that to?
Some of it in the residential side will be market related, because the market year over year, I do believe, increased. Of course, we didn't create last year's assessment, so I'm not sure how close to market it was, but that's what I would, I guess, credit that to. A lot of it will be fairness and equity. So it's an equalization. It's looking at a property and determining if the assessment's correct based on the condition and the location of it in the non-residential side. Hence the decrease. That would have been the 1 to 10% decrease would have been probably a strong focus on properties that were maybe slightly overassessed. Not that the market went down necessarily, but that they just weren't where they should have been in the past. I don't believe the market actually decreased much year over year. On the residential side, it didn't. And I think the non-residential side, there may have been areas or property types that did decrease year over year, but as a whole, things were fairly static. What I can say is that because I have no education on last year's assessment, I can't speak to why the change occurred, because this year's is where we feel it's correct. Can't speak to as to why last year's was where it was, whether it's high or low.
Because like on your page with the
Yes.
green, yeah,
Yep.
you see the page before. If you look at 2021 versus 2020, it's over $100 million of change assessment. But even if you look over like the 5 years, right? 2019, it's looks like $50 million. Is that, am I reading those numbers correctly?
Approximate change, you're saying?
Yeah, like if you look at your chart, right? It's
Yes.
$100 million more value this year
Yes,
than it was last year.
that's right.
And then
That's
if you kind of look, okay, so maybe last year was like a
Yeah,
one-off,
a
right? It was
$50
just
million.
a bad, poor real estate, like the market
It-
didn't cover it. So if you looked at 2019, 2018, those are like $50 million higher this year
That's
than
correct.
those 2 years, and then not much different, let's say this is 130, so 30 million from 2017.
That's correct.
I'm just want to make sure I was reading that correctly.
Yeah.
And so you think that the reason for that is because you've reassessed everything and you've caught maybe some inconsistencies?
That is correct, Your Worship. That is correct. Yeah. And we can, of course, speak on that
Yeah.
further in this slide, in the presentation. Now, the next table is similar in nature, you'll see, but it's by dollar change instead of percent change. And the reason I do that is because percent change of a small number is still a small number, but a percent change of a large number can be significant. If there is a 10% change on a $70,000 property, well, it's only $7,000, but $1 million property, that's $100,000 change. So it's a different visual or I guess view of it. So here we've got the array of properties with 55% of them seeing anywhere from a $1,000 to $100,000 change in value.
So 4% of the properties, if I'm reading this right, 4%. That's not percent of properties. So of the 122, they went up 4% from $1 million to 100,000 to $1 million.
122 properties experience a $100,000 to $1 million increase in their assessment, which accounts for 4% of the total taxable property count in town.
But it doesn't say the percentage of the change.
No, because it's in that entire
Did it say that on
range.
the thing before?
No, that we've got lists of those, you know, and the majority of them will be closer to $100,000 than $1 million. It's similar to a bell curve. This year is a little less so. The future years, it'll be very much a bell curve. You'll see the high, you know, it'll be just like if you're familiar with the bell curve. But in this particular instance, yes, there's 122 properties that are experiencing a change, an increase in assessment between $100,000 and $1 million. And that constitutes approximately 4% of the taxable properties.
122 is 4% of the
Of the
total number
taxable
of
property
properties.
count, yes. Property count, yeah. And then you can see properties experiencing over $1 million increase, 14 of those. Now I will be adding some more information near the end.
I'm sorry, I'm envisioning 156 people calling, 136 people calling me.
And I've got good news for you. I do have good news for you regarding our proactive approach.
I think Councillor
And-
Phillips has a
and
question.
Just to clarify, when we're talking about $100,000 increase in assessment, that could have went from a $3 million value to a $3.1 million value.
Precisely.
Correct. So that's,
A small
when you
percentage.
put it
That's why
that,
I
it
was
doesn't sound
asking
so
what-
bad.
Yeah, that's why I was asking if it's the percentage of the total price. It's just
Yes.
a number.
That's correct. It could be a $10 million, or it could be maybe $100,000 property going to $200,000 property. It's going to fall within that particular range. And then, of course, you can see there, we've got 44 new accounts and 9 inactive roles. The inactive role count is not a normal count that you'll see moving forward. Part of our review of all the properties in town, we were also reviewing whether there were instances where an assessment roll may have had 3 lots on it combined into one assessment roll. But when we pull title to establish if these 3 should actually be individual rolls or assessed together, we found instances where there are actually 3 separate titles that could be sold off at any point, not bound by one link number or not bound by a building spanning across. So then we would, you know, potentially inactivate roles or activate roles depending on what we found. So it was property cleanup essentially is what we did. The next slide is more of a trend on, you could say, economics and development. It's showing a new role summary for the last 5 years. And you can see that 2019, the top table there is 2019 showed, you know, very few new accounts, but the 2 years before and the 2 years after are very, very similar in nature. So of course, the 2021 account of 44 is inflated because there were a lot of instances where we separated out accounts because they required it. They shouldn't have been assessed as one account. They should have been assessed as 3 different accounts. And then development permits, 5-year look at that. And I mean, it's promising future. Looks like, you know, economics, again, supporting an increase in economics there, real estate economics. Which is what I would expect and what I'm also finding in other municipalities. I do several towns, town of St. Paul, the town of Bonnyville, the town of Westlock, the city of Wetaskiwin, and city of Chestermere, and the town of High Level. And you know, this is the type of stuff that I look at, consistencies across the board, barring that a town may be unique in nature. You know, if they're got similar aspects, then we should see similar conclusions. So this year, again, a little complicated to convey the change in assessment year over year, because again, we did not derive last year's assessment. So what I can say, general terms, is land, land values in town. And then when I speak of, I'm not speaking of what the market did. I'm speaking of what the assessment did. Mixed changes. Some areas saw an increase in land values. For example, when it comes to River Row, that particular, in our analysis, was found to be, needed to come up. The assessment needed to increase on the land there. General residential, for the most part, probably not too far off. We found we agreed with much of what was last year's assessment, but we fine-tuned it. Non-residential assessment, when it comes to highway commercial, we come up with our own conclusions based on sales, and we applied them. So again, mixed changes when it comes to land. Overall improved, a moderate increase overall. And as I stated earlier in the presentation, anywhere probably from a 3 to 6%, 3 to 5% increase in market values year over year. So most residential assessments will probably see an increase, but not all, because again, this year was a fairness and equity equalization, getting all our ducks in a row and comparing apples to apples. So some residential properties may see a decrease for whatever reason. Maybe there was a building that hasn't been there for 5 years, or maybe that the house was deteriorated, because it wasn't noted in the past, whatever the case is. So there is a little bit of a mixed change there, but overall, an increase in residential. Multifamily, what's called multifamily residential, that I can say increased largely. There was sales evidence and market evidence to show that. Apartment buildings incurred a significant increase year over year. There was absolutely no market indicator suggesting that it was correct last year. No disrespect but what. Go ahead.
Councillor Phillips had a
So
question.
do you feel that was because they were being assessed more on a cost approach prior? And now you're doing it on a direct comparable sales approach?
I really couldn't comment because it's speculation at best for me. But what I can say is that I feel, knowing what apartment buildings are worth, generally speaking, in Alberta, in a poor economy, such as the city of Wetaskiwin, in some areas they're $40,000 a door. And then you can get up to 80 or 90 or even $110,000 a door in other locations of Alberta. Well, these needed to come up. Just based on that knowledge, I was like, how can this be? So then when we looked at the very few sales that existed, that supported it totally. So we went ahead, and then we look at the rents, of who did supply information, and we look at their opinions of values too. And the conclusion was fairly straightforward to us. So this is an area of property or property type that will experience a tremendous increase. Now, in saying that, if there are situations where there's an apartment building or a fourplex or a duplex that is unique in nature, and when I mean unique, I mean either run down or something is required, something that we don't know about, well, then we're hoping that those property owners get a hold of us and let us know of this through the whole process that was explained earlier in the presentation, and we correct this and we move forward. But until we know those items, we can't just speculate that they exist or don't exist. So this first year, and we'll speak more of this down in a little bit, but this first year will be, there'll be a lot of speaking with property owners, getting more information that they didn't want to provide in the past, or they said, I don't need to fill out this RFI. This is garbage. And all of a sudden they may phone and say, I don't think my assessment's right. What happened here? Well, you didn't fill out the information. Are you willing to now? Sure. Okay. So, and we learned something, the foundation sinking or whatever. So, there's ways that we're going to be approaching this very, very, I guess, carefully and etc.
Councillor Phillips had another question.
So I just want to clarify. So the assessed value on specifically those apartments is now correct. So for the years prior, those values were actually underinflated or undervalued from an assessment point of view.
I can't say that
Okay.
at this point. I cannot speak to that because I did not study the market back in 2012, 2014, 2016. All I can speak to is what I see in the market between 2018 and 2021.
I have a question along the same lines. So, generally speaking, though, the change in the apartment buildings could be from going from a cost approach to the income approach. Because my question is lots of things can be for sale at a certain market value and money talks, right? So if something's for sale for $120,000 a door, it's not selling. It's not actually worth $120,000 a store. You could be trying to sell something for $80,000 a door, but you couldn't even get $40,000 a door. So if one building sells for 120, don't you think that it's only based on what's actually selling? What if you feel your value is worth $40,000 a door, but you've never sold it? No one else has got anything similar. Then how do you feel that approach is any better than the cost approach?
Okay, well, it's the principle of substitution again. So if a particular property has sold for this amount and there are no indicators saying that that wasn't a market value sale, then a property similar to it next door or down the street should be worth roughly the same. That's how an appraiser would approach this. And that's how assessors approach this. When it comes to your question regarding cost approach versus income, the income approach, when you have a sale of a property and you have the rents and you have the expenses, it is a more dependable approach to a market value because that property was built and designed to earn revenue and an expectation of return on investment. So the conclusion based on the income approach versus the cost to build that apartment and then add your land value, there's much more confidence in attaining a market value to that apartment building if there are very few sales to do any supporting of it. If you have sales, typically the income approach and the sales approach will work together. They will show the same result. And so I'm hoping I answer your question on that. The cost approach really is you use that in the event that you have either a very unique property that doesn't sell or you have hardly any sales. That's the only two, because if you do not have any sales to draw from, all you have is the cost to build this building and whatever the land value is. That's the best you can do. But if you have sales, that trumps the confidence of the cost approach.
Yeah. I just have a follow-up and then Councillor Phillips has I think another question. Is that correct? So my question is then for the income approach, if you have from the town assessment, because we're basing all our numbers on that. If you have a strange year where, for example, in the last 2 years, we had like huge vacancy in residential properties, like bad economics, weird stuff happening, is that going to fluctuate these numbers that we're going to have to look at every year? Like, do you know, because if we're basing things on the income approach rather than cost approach, it in theory should go kind of up, right? Because 2x4s never go down in price, they always go up. And land, same thing. It's sort of, there's peaks and valleys for sure, but with the income approach, would it not really fluctuate based on the economics of certain areas of Alberta? Like
it will, absolutely, it will fluctuate. Regarding we call this a blip, the last year and a half, essentially. And with the residential market, in most cases, actually, the residential market baffled assessors and appraisers, whereby 3 months into the pandemic, all of a sudden properties are starting to climb. We did not expect that. We thought everybody would just shut down and wait till this was all over, but that didn't happen. With regards to vacancies, whether it be non-residential retail or whatever the case is, we did allow for that I can speak in other municipalities where we've been doing the assessments for a time and we entered, doing them into this pandemic and then moved through them. There was an allowance for that type of thing, but it wasn't a huge 20% drop. It was more so, 4, 5, 6% adjustment to certain properties, not your Tim Hortons, not your grocery stores, your big grocery stores. Like it was more so your mom and pop retail, those types. Then there were specific properties that incurred a larger hit, hotels. Okay, well, those you couldn't soften that. They went from 80% occupancy to 20% occupancy, for a year and a half. So, those ones they dropped at a faster rate. Movie theaters, whatever, you can name a few others, but there were some that actually thrived too. So regarding these economic challenges, we hate peaks and valleys in assessment because it's difficult for budgets. It's difficult to explain to people. So we really try to soften this up. And that's why we look at 3 years of sales and then, we'll make adjustments, but not drastic ones year over year if we can help it. There are certain circumstances where we can't help it, such as the hotel industry and such. But I hope that answers the
because
question for the most part.
there was, lots of businesses struggled over the last 2 years. And I'm just wondering, if as a corporation, we're going to have to deal with like challenges
Future.
for the like next year or 5 years, like if there's a dip in the oil or however it happens, if we're going to have to like be curious about, oh gosh, what's going to happen this year with the assessment, because Betty, our beautiful Betty is like budgeting us really tightly, we have to do a good job. And so assessment will change sort of, could, like we're going the other way, but we want to for sure.
And can I comment on that? Is that okay? Okay, I thank you for that. And I can totally appreciate the concern there. And what I can say is I will be working very closely with Betty as I do with our other municipalities. There's an interim budget and usually I get an email from the CFO at those locations saying, what are we looking at? And I can do my best. I mean, sometimes it's a little bit premature to make estimations, but I certainly will work with Betty on this and we'll have it as close as we can, always, and I'm always staying on the conservative side of things, but we'll work with the town to try to have the most precise numbers that we can prior to the assessment rollout.
Yeah, because and I realize that only, $100,000 on 5 million is a small percentage, but it's still $100,000 that a company's going to have to come up with, or whatever the number is. And, we're all really tight to our budgets. And so I'm just curious. And then I know Councillor Phillips has a question, but thank you so much for addressing that.
Sorry, just a quick clarification on that, what you had just said. If their value goes from 5 to 5.1 million in assessed value, that's not going to be $100,000 in extra tax they're going to be paying. It's only on that 100. It'll be on that $100,000, not on the whole. So
I understand, but yes.
Okay.
So they're not coming up with $100,000 worth of tax dollars.
Exactly.
It'll be the mill rate on
$100,000.
But if they're paying a 20% mill rate, I won't say, but if they're paying 13% versus 17%, right? Mill rate. We don't know what the mill rate is until we have the total assessment, right? And then it goes backwards. So, 20% of $100,000 is 20 grand, right? So a business has to come up with 20 grand more. So I'm just asking lots of questions because I'm going to have someone call me.
Yeah,
we all will.
And one thing we never assume that whether it's $500, $200 or $5,000, it's your money. That's so, we never hardly ever get into a tax discussion with property owners, but we do recognize that and we do appreciate that. So absolutely. But when it comes to dips and valleys, I mean, we do our best to have the assessments. At the end of the day, the market tells us what's happening. So if there is a downturn or an upswing, the assessments will follow suit. We we never try to have an assessment higher than we can defend, first off, but we always paramount to that is fairness and equity. So that's the most paramount. So yeah, we'll be working with the town very closely.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Councillor Phillips, did you have another question or comment?
More of a comment. Just when you're talking about the income approach and the direct sales comparison approach, those are hard numbers. You have a sale, you have a house, you can compare that to the next house. That's a hard number. Same thing with the income approach. This building makes this much income, which creates this much value. When you're looking at the cost approach, and that's why you don't use this approach much, there's a wild card factor on it costs this much to build new, it's 30 years old, it's going to be depreciated.
That's right.
Is that a 25% depreciation or a 35% depreciation? That's where the subjective comes into play, where the other two are hard numbers and they're easy to defend.
Absolutely, that's correct. That is one major factor, as well as the fact that the cost of construction in a specific economy may not reflect what that property is worth. If you were in Wabasca Desmarais and it's going to cost you the same amount to build your house there or more than it would if you were in let's say Edmonton or Calgary, but it's probably going to be worth less than it would be worth in Edmonton or Calgary. So going based solely on the cost approach is not a reflection or it's not a confident way of I guess putting a value on a property that's supposed to be reflective of market value. So,
But when you're an investor, your ROI is based on that.
that's true. Yeah, that's correct. That's
So
correct.
you have to get whoever's going to talk to you to convert their brain from an investor or a property owner
Yeah.
to a realtor.
Yeah.
So that'll be fun.
Moving to non-residential, again, a mixed change. I can't really tell you whether market values changed one way or another. I would have expected, looking at other municipalities that we've done, that we've completed assessments in over this last year, that those specific properties that suffered a hit in 2020 continued on a little bit in 2021, but then the others that I spoke of also thrived. So those ones probably stayed very static. When I mean thrive, I mean business went on as usual. So their values actually didn't drop, whether it be your Tim Hortons or whether it be your Canadian Tires or whatever. Very little change year over year. But the theaters and the hotels, yeah, they suffered for another year. So that, coupled with the fact that we really focused on fairness and equity again, and I nail that home, there were properties that went up in value, properties that went down. No reflection of the market and what it did necessarily, just apples to apples, evening the playing field. So if there were two properties that were built in, let's say 1995, 5,000 square foot warehouse, and one was assessed at 800,000 and the other assessed at 950,000, and they're identical in nature, this has got to be fixed. I'm just throwing a theoretical
Random.
out there. So maybe the right number is 875 for both, or maybe it was 800 or 900, but we figured that out. And then we apply that to all of them. So if you remember back, I spoke of a reinspection cycle or schedule. This is our first kick at it. We're thinking, we didn't even get to that far because we weren't worried about actually setting up this schedule yet, because we did a complete reinspection. But this is probably what we're going to be doing from a residential perspective, is where this year, 2022, we won't be implementing, because we did everything last year. We won't be reinspecting a specific area. We'll be more focusing on particular unique properties, gas stations and stuff like that. And we'll be gathering some further information on that. But starting in 2023, then we will, as you can see, break it down into not quadrants, but sectors, I guess, of town. 2023 being the northerly part, then 2024 central, 2025, and then 2026 is two different areas. So that's our residential inspection cycle. It may change once we have a closer look at that this spring, but for now, that's what we're looking at. Then the next slide is our reinspection cycle for non-residential property. This is annual. We do this cycle annually, and the reason we do this, and that doesn't necessarily mean that we go in every property. It's a visual reinspection. And if we deem it need for it, we will contact the owners. But what we do here is we keep tabs on tenant movement, vacancy rates, improvements being built or removed. And this type of action tends to happen at a higher capacity or a higher rate in a non-residential section, especially in an industrial park where a lot can be fenced, can have security fencing within a week. And there may or may not be a permit for it. And we don't know what is required, if a permit's even required for a fence or paving, et cetera. So we just reinspect every property visually every year just to look for changes. And the biggest benefit to that is to keep our finger on the pulse of vacancy rates and economic factors. This helps us a lot because there are a lot less sales in the non-residential assessment than there are on the residential assessment. So it's important that we're very familiar all the time. And then moving forward, well, we'll be handling the inquiries due to the assessment notice mail out coming up. We'll be addressing concerns. We'll be scheduling any inspections, and we anticipate there'll be a number of inspections between March and May. What I can say on top of that bullet is that, alluding back to a comment I had made, we actually have a list of property owners, properties that have experienced an increase in assessment of greater than 20%. Now, and the list is roughly 300, I think 322, if my memory serves me correctly. Now, not all those 322 property owners will require a phone call, because if a property went from 55,000 and up to 20%, it's not a big impact. But the larger ones, and we're going through and we're ascertaining which ones, and we've done this already. Actually, Corey and Jesse are waiting on standby as soon as we get the go ahead to start phoning. We've got about 120 phone calls to make, and which is, this is a courtesy call. I think it's preemptive. I think it's a very, very, very smart thing to do. Connect with the property owners, ask them, let them know who we are, what's happening, and what they can expect in the next couple of weeks. And then also let them know that to consider this new assessment, to thoroughly consider it. And then if they have questions or feel it's unfair, to contact us directly rather than go any other route. Not to say, and in that same breath, when Jesse and Corey and myself are speaking with them, not to say that we can make a change, but we'll have a review of it. And I think this will help out, moving into the spring a lot. There are certain instances too where we probably won't, we'll just, if it's a big corporation, there's nobody to talk to on it. So we'll be waiting for either the agents to phone or whatever the case is, if that happens. But for the most part, if it's local individuals, we'll be contacting them. We expect there may be a lot of property owners that want us to come and do a full inspection, and we will be here. So we expect to be in town a lot. We expect that some of the property owners may have evidence of, phase 3 packages of contamination on their property. This happens in other municipalities as well. We're unfamiliar with this. So, provide the information, provide the evidence of what's happening or what the problem is with the property, and we can consider it, definitely. So a lot of PR, a lot of one-on-one with the property owners, and I expect overall, it'll go very, very smoothly. I find that for every property owner that's unreasonable, there's typically 10 that are very reasonable, and they get it. So then that's going to be that. Then later in the summer, we'll be preparing the second round, the next 2022 assessment RFI letters to the properties that are in a lease or a tenant landlord relationship, whether it be your apartment buildings, your fourplexes, or your commercial type buildings. Last year we mailed out a lot. This year there'll be a lot fewer to mail out. And that's because we established in many cases that properties are owner occupied, so they don't get this request. And then finally, in the fall and early winter, we'll be inspecting new permits and incomplete construction as per what is done is every year in the September through November timeframe.
Councillor Ald has a question.
Just, would you say your assessment and an actual homeowner's inspection, like if you need to go to the bank for a mortgage, they require you to have an inspection. Would you say your assessment and those inspections are pretty much mirrored? Or do you think there's quite a variance between those two?
Okay, thank you, sir. To be clear, when you say inspection, are you talking an appraisal?
Sorry. Appraisal.
Yes, okay, just
Yeah.
to be
For a
clear. Okay,
mortgage.
so I usually we approach appraisals with some skepticism because in a residential situation, they're going to be close. What I'll say is they'll be relatively close. They should be. They may be, our assessment may be historical in nature because it's already, right now, it's already 8 months. Our evaluation date, which I think I alluded to earlier, is July 1st, 2021. So the assessments are a reflection of the value of the property as of that. So if a property owner were to bring an appraisal as of July of 2021, then yes, I would expect they may be within $10,000. They should be. However, there are instances where we found where the appraisal is much lower or much higher. And sometimes we can't understand why that is, except for circumstances unique to that situation, whether it be financing or whatever the case is. But we will consider appraisals. We don't always find them to be similar to what we have, or what our assessment is. Depends on the reason for the appraisal too.
Did anyone else have any questions or comments? Thank you very much,
you.
Mr. Doodlin.
Dodlin,
Sorry.
that's okay.
I'm like, so I believe we'll break for a brief recess, or do you want me to go into closed
Your
session?
worship, you can either break for a recess, then go into closed session, or we can go straight into closed session.
So what I'd like to do is break for a brief recess till 2:30, and then when we come back, we'll go into closed session. So, because I'm watching my time, Tracy. It's almost 2:30. Yes, actually, Councillor Phillips has a great point. I'd like to accept the presentation.
Your worship, just clarification, that'd probably be appropriate after we come out of closed session.
Thank you very much. So we'll break for recess now for 10 minutes or till 2:30, and then we'll come back and go into closed session.